17% of the world's liquefied natural gas supply just went up in smoke, gone. In a matter of hours, Iranian strikes on Qatar's largest processing facility wiped out a chunk of global energy infrastructure that will take years to rebuild. Gas prices. They tripled in 3 weeks, jumping from $10 to $30 per unit. The Financial Times is calling this the Armageddon scenario. But that is only the beginning, because today we also need to talk about Germany spending billions on military equipment that literally endangers its own soldiers, Trump telling Cuba he can do whatever he wants, and a Supreme Court ruling on tariffs that could cost every American household an extra $1,500. Stay with me. The most important part is at the very end. If you find this kind of independent analysis valuable, hit that subscribe button and consider supporting the channel through Super Thanks. Every episode takes hours of research and fact-checking to make sure you get the real story, not recycled headlines. Your likes and comments push this content to more people through the algorithm. Now let us get into it. So here is what happened. Iran struck Qatar's Ras Laffan facility, one of the most critical energy hubs on the planet. The damage was so severe that Qatari officials are saying it will take 3 to 5 years to fully restore operations. Think about that. 3 to 5 years. But wait, that is not the whole story. The Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly 20% of the world's gas trade passes, is now effectively closed. And here is what most people miss. Unlike oil, there are no strategic reserves of liquefied natural gas. None. You cannot just open a valve somewhere and flood the market. Right now, the world is getting a massive supply shock with no safety net. If you think this only matters to energy traders in London or Houston, let me explain why it hits you directly. Higher gas prices mean higher electricity bills, higher heating costs, higher prices for anything manufactured or shipped, which is, well, everything. Now let me take you to Germany, because what is happening there is almost too absurd to believe. The German military spent 3 billion euros on a new digital communication system designed to modernize battlefield operations. Sounds reasonable, right? Except the system does not work. Voice communications are unstable, the range falls below specifications, and here is the truly alarming part: the friend or foe identification system is unreliable. You know what that means. Soldiers using this equipment cannot reliably tell whether they are looking at their own forces or the enemy. An internal report, which the Defense Ministry tried to hide from Parliament, states that deploying this system, and I am quoting directly, creates a threat to life and health of the soldiers it is supposed to protect. Let that sink in. A NATO member spent billions on equipment its own military considers dangerous to use. Europe keeps talking about defense readiness, about rebuilding military capacity, and then it spends 3 billion on a radio that cannot tell friend from foe. Classic. Speaking of governments that seem disconnected from reality, let us talk about Cuba. Trump declared publicly, and I want you to hear these exact words, "I can do whatever I want when it comes to Cuba." He demanded they change their leadership. Just like that, as if sovereign nations are subsidiaries of the White House. A Cuban diplomat responded with remarkable composure, saying, "Only the Cuban people have the right to choose their leaders." Now, here is the pattern I want you to notice. Greenland, the Panama Canal, now Cuba. There is a recurring theme in this administration's foreign policy, this idea that American power alone entitles you to dictate terms to other nations without negotiation, without diplomacy, without basic respect for sovereignty. Does this approach actually produce results, or does it just generate headlines while the real problems remain unsolved? If you are finding this useful, drop a comment below. Tell me which story caught you off guard today. And if you have not subscribed yet, now is a good time. We dig into stories like these every single week. Let me shift to something that hits closer to home for millions of Americans. Rural hospitals are closing across the country, and the scale is staggering. 90% of American territory is classified as rural. 60 million people live in those areas. Over 40% of rural hospitals are operating at a loss right now. More than 100 have shut their doors over the past 2 decades. If you live in a small town and your nearest hospital closes, the next one might be an hour away. Or 2. And here is what makes it worse. Congressional Republicans approved cuts to Medicaid amounting to nearly $1 trillion over a decade. Medicaid, the program that keeps many of these struggling hospitals alive. The White House response? Rural hospitals are, quote, chronically underused. $50 billion has been approved for reform, But does anyone honestly believe 50 billion offsets a trillion in cuts? The math does not work, and the people paying the price are not politicians in Washington, they are families who just need a hospital within driving distance. Now, a story that flew under the radar, but has massive implications. Supermicro, a major American tech company, was indicted for smuggling advanced NVIDIA artificial intelligence chips to China, directly bypassing export controls. A board member resigned. The stock crashed, becoming the worst performer in the entire index. Why does this matter? Because these export controls are supposedly the backbone of America's strategy to maintain its technological edge over China. And yet, American companies are allegedly circumventing those very controls for profit. It raises an uncomfortable question: how many others are quietly doing the same thing? And while we are on things that should outrage you, a German hosting provider deleted 7 years of a Ukrainian media outlet's journalistic archive over an unpaid bill of €174. Payments from Ukraine could not go through because of the war. Before deleting everything, the provider had forwarded Russian government censorship demands to this Ukrainian outlet 5 separate times, a European company forwarding censorship requests from an aggressor state to the very journalists documenting that aggression and then erasing their work over a billing technicality. You tell me if that sounds accidental. 2 more stories briefly. Artificial intelligence. 4 years after the most hyped technology launch of our generation, real adoption is far slower than the evangelists promised. Companies poured billions in, but returns remain modest. The revolution, it seems, is more of a slow evolution. Keep that in mind next time someone tells you AI will replace everything by next year. And Robert Mueller passed away at 81. He led the investigation into Russian interference in American elections, an inquiry that resulted in 34 indictments. A sitting president chose to celebrate his passing on social media. Whatever you think of the investigation, that fact alone tells you something about where political discourse in this country stands. I saved the biggest domestic story for last because this one will be felt in every American wallet. The Supreme Court ruled Trump's tariffs unconstitutional 6-3. Instead of accepting the ruling, the administration immediately pivoted, imposing new tariffs under a different legal authority, 10 to 15% on imports from nearly every country on earth. We are talking about $1.2 trillion in affected imports. The Tax Foundation calls this the largest tax increase as a share of the economy since the early 90s. Goldman Sachs projects an additional 1% jump in inflation. What does that translate to for you and me? An extra $1,500 per year for the average American household. That is groceries, that is rent, that is gas. And this is happening while the economy is already under pressure from the energy crisis we discussed at the top of this episode. Higher energy costs plus higher tariff costs. That combination squeezes ordinary families from both sides at once, and nobody in Washington seems to have a plan for that. Every like, every comment, every share tells the algorithm that independent journalism matters. Producing this takes real work, verifying claims, cross-referencing sources, cutting through noise so you do not have to. If you want this channel to stay independent, consider supporting through Super Thanks or subscribing if you have not yet. Leave a comment, share your perspective, challenge my take. This is a conversation, not a lecture. Thank you for being here, genuinely. I will see you in the next one, and trust me, there will be plenty to talk about.